Welcome back to Financial Fortitude. I'm Michael Acosta.
And I'm Brady Hemmerly.
Today we're breaking down a recent Forbes article from student loan attorney Adam Minsky titled 5 Massive Changes to Student Loans Go Into Effect in Just 30 Days. If you're a medical student, resident, attending physician, dentist, pharmacist, attorney, or anyone carrying federal student loan debt, this episode is a must listen to.
July 1st is shaping up to be one of the biggest student loan policy transition dates we've seen in years. Repayment plans are changing, forgiveness rules are adjusting, borrowing limits are changing, and many borrowers don't even realize the deadlines are quickly approaching.
We'll walk through what is actually changing, who is affected, what actions borrowers should be taking right now, and where we think the biggest planning opportunities exist moving forward. Welcome to Financial Fortitude, a podcast for high earners, families, and business owners. We are your hosts, Michael Acosta
and Brady Hemmerly. Each week, we bring purpose-driven financial guidance to you so you can be assured you're on the right path. If you're looking to become an extraordinary wealth builder, let's dive in. Well, Michael, I'm excited to, again, revisit the student loan topic because the landscape is consistently changing. There's always something new, at least to consider, whether you already have loans or you're a potential new loan candidate. And there's a lot of planning that goes into this, right, outside of just simply picking a payment plan and just hoping for the best. So lots to talk about.
Yeah, I think there's a ton of opportunity here for listeners, our following, to be able to create an action plan coming out of this, whether it's revisit their existing strategy with their advisor if they have one. If they don't have one, start searching for a certified student loan professional who really understands the intricacies of what's taking place. But also just to make sure that they don't get caught off guard out of left field with some of these sweeping changes that are going to be occurring over the course of the next 30 days, but also over the course of the next 2 years. And so I'm excited to break it down. I know we've done some episodes over the course of the last couple months touching on what's to come, but it's go time, right? Like this is starting to happen. It's starting to be presented and people are needing to make decisions in a relatively quick fashion.
So let's start there because we have a deadline approaching here within the next under a month and then some time thereafter. What's the biggest change? Like what are most people seeing, reading in the news? What's the first adjustment really?
Yeah, one of the biggest ones is that the SAVE plan is effectively dead, right? And so we've known this, we've recorded an episode on this, but this puts about 7.5 million borrowers on notice. The loan servicers that are on the roster today are going to start sending out notices by mail, email, whatever, to all these borrowers that are still enrolled in the SAVE plan that have been sitting in an administrative forbearance, who have already been notified once, in most cases, that the SAVE plan is no longer effective, but no actual action is required currently up to this point. That all changes. Now it's, hey, over the course of the next couple months post July 1st, you're going to be required to make a decision on which repayment plan you're going to go into. Now, if you're one of those individuals that have been sitting in the SAVE plan, not being required to make a payment, that's fine. Just understand that your loans have been accruing interest, and that interest isn't being offset by any sort of interest subsidies at this point like it was when the SAVE plan was active. So July 1st is that go time date when some of the sweeping changes that we're going to be talking about go into effect, or at least are supposed to be if things go according to plan.
Just for some quick background, can you share for any new listeners or perhaps new student loan listeners, what is or was the SAVE plan and why is it going away?
Yeah, so the SAVE plan is an acronym. It stands for Saving on a Valuable Education. It was implemented during the previous administration's stint in the Oval Office and in the White House. It was one of the strongest income-driven repayment options to this date when it came to interest subsidies as far as long-term interest accruing on loans. It was the most forgiven from that aspect and also offered the lowest monthly payments for most borrowers. The reason behind that is because, like many income-driven repayment plan calculations like new income-based repayment or pay-as-you-earn, they would take the adjusted gross income of the household based on the tax filing of the borrower, right? From there, they were inflating the U.S. poverty line by 225% as a deduction against the adjusted gross income, as opposed to these other original plans at 150%. So you're already getting a big reduction in what your household discretionary income looks like with the SAVE plan compared to the other plans, which, again, in a meaningful way reduces how much you're required to pay annually or monthly. And they were using the same 10% allocation of household discretionary income to allocate towards payments. Now, where this got very lucrative for the borrower is that if your monthly payment alone was less than the monthly interest that was due, then the difference or the excess would be forgiven through interest subsidies. And I think that's where it got a lot of people up on Capitol Hill a little upset and ruffled up. And that's where some of these changes started to happen with the new administration.
Got it. So it's no shock that 7.5 million people are affected by this, because what I'm hearing essentially from you is this was often the most strategic plan to consider for forgiveness, for lowering payments, for potential interest subsidies. There were a ton of benefits to using this plan, and those benefits are going away because the plan's just not an eligible choice any longer.
Correct. Now, that could always change, right? This is a little bit of a speculative statement. That could always change depending on how the pendulum swings in 2028 with the outcome of any future elections, right?
Got it.
So, unfortunately, student loan planning over the course of the last decade hasn't been very static. It's been relatively fluid with some of the national and global events that have occurred, but it continues to keep us relevant and continues to keep our borrowers or our clients on their toes.
So I'd say the doing nothing or kind of just waiting and seeing approach is now no longer valid as a strategy. So then my next question is, hey, if Save's not available anymore to me, what are some of the things that I need to begin considering? Plus, what then might be my options? So we'll break that into two pieces. What are some things I've got to consider bigger picture within my financial situation? And then on top of that, okay, now I've got those things considered. What plans are actually available?
Yeah, so for some of these borrowers, the 7.5 million borrowers that we've noted, they haven't been required to make a student loan payment since the summer of 2024 in many instances. So what would have otherwise been budgeted dollars going towards student loans has more than likely been absorbed somewhere else, been reallocated somewhere else, whether it's additional savings and investing, whether it's being consumed by the lifestyle creep, whether it's going towards targeting, high interest bearing revolving credit card debt, whatever it might be, it's going somewhere else other than the student loans. Well, now that's going to change and the payment's likely going to be higher than what it was when it was in the SAVE plan. So two things are going to happen to these borrowers who have been doing nothing and who have been hoping that nothing comes of this, right? One, their balances are larger than what they were effectively 2 years ago because interest has been accruing. Two, this period of non-payment does not qualify towards time-based forgiveness. For public service loan forgiveness, you do have the option of the buyback plan to be able to go backwards and buy them back once you have identified or confirmed that you've made 120 eligible or qualifying payments towards your loans. But from a sticker shock perspective or a lifestyle shock perspective, when you start to see what your new payment's going to be, you might say, hey, I can't afford that anymore. And so this is where your advisor, or if you're a DIYer, you're going to have a real hard look in the mirror and say, okay, well, what am I going to have to start carving out of my lifestyle? Or where am I going to have to reallocate cash flow? Or what is the new perspective on this that I have to take to be able to make this worthwhile? And so that's where I think they have to revisit the strategy at hand that was developed a year ago, 2 years ago, or from the onset of when they completed their training or education journey.
Yeah, it just puts the spotlight back on the cash flow picture for the most part. And then to follow up there, as the spotlight is back on the cash flow picture, we've got to be more purpose-driven on what we're actually doing within our plan to satisfy the student loan payment itself and continue working towards the rest of our goals.
Correct. Now, the second question you asked, well, what are our options as far as repayment plans? I think was where we were heading with this. So SAVE is no longer a thing. Well, one of the new plans that came out of the passing of the One Big Beautiful Bill Act was the Repayment Assistance Plan. So this is a new income-driven repayment plan. There's also a new tiered standard repayment plan. So traditionally, the standard repayment was 10 years, 20 years, in some instances 30 years, depending on how you restructured the loans, okay, from like a consolidation standpoint. Now with this tiered program, you're going to have the ability to opt into a standard repayment that's 10 years repayments, 15 years, 20 years, 25 years. So that's one option. It's fixed, it does not qualify for forgiveness, does not qualify towards PSLF credits like the current 10-year standard repayment does, okay? Now, the repayment assistance plan is lucrative in some instances for some borrowers, but for most it's going to be more expensive, specifically the borrowers that we tend to work with the most who are seeking time-based forgiveness or public service loan forgiveness, usually aesthetically they're making, $250,000, $300,000, $350,000 or more, maybe a medical professional, attorney, engineer, someone to that extent, and their income, because their income is large and the student loan balance is large, the time-based forgiveness works. But it's usually because, or the public service loan forgiveness works, but it's usually because of the spread between where we can find cash savings by picking the most effective income-driven repayment plan. Well, with the repayment assistance plan, that's not going to work that way. Why? Because the plan itself is a progressive table, kind of like our tax table, if you think about the marginal tax rates. So the way that this plan works is it's taking the household adjusted gross income of the borrower, and the payment range is going to be from 1% to 10% of the adjusted gross income, depending on income level. So the higher your income, the higher the percentage that you're paying. So if you earn $10,000 to $20,000 in income, it's 1%. Okay, now the minimum payment is always $10. It can never be less than that. With older income-driven repayment plans like pay-as-you-earn, save, new income-based repayment, old income-based repayment, if the outcome of taking your adjusted gross income minus your family size and an inflated U.S. poverty line deduction was zero or negative, your payment could be zero for up to 12 months until you were required to recertify. That's not the case anymore. So for many physicians or dentists who are earning $200,000, $250,000 up to $500,000 or more, the repayment assistance plan, known as RAP, will result in significantly larger payments than the SAVE plan did, and likely even compared to pay-as-you-earn or new income-based repayment, might be very close to old income-based repayment.
So what I'm hearing from a strategy standpoint, and correct me if I'm wrong, I have the option to switch into standard repayment, a tiered repayment, or the RAP plan.
Yes. Now, the old standard repayment will not be an option for new borrowers after July 1st. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but there will be some additional changes that come with eligibility around repayment plans based on when loans were dispersed. But if you're an OG loan borrower prior to July 1st, 2026, then yes, you will have a wider range of options to choose from. Now, other characteristics of the RAP plan is that there is an interest subsidy. Now, it's not as lucrative as the SAVE plan, but it is one of the RAP plan's strongest features, in my opinion. So if a borrower's required payment does not cover all accrued interest, the unpaid interest is waived and does not get added to your balance. So what does this offer? Well, it prevents negative amortization. Example, if the monthly interest on your payment is $600, but your RAP plan payment is $250, the delta, the difference there of $350 is forgiven for that month rather than added to the loan balance. So it's similar to SAVE, but it's not in the same essence. Now, to take this a step further, there's also a principal reduction match. So this is a little bit different than the SAVE plan, and it's a little bit different with how other income-driven repayment plans are calculated because they're using an inflated U.S. poverty line deduction against your adjusted gross income. In this scenario, the RAP plan is going to include this, again, unique principal subsidy to where if your payment doesn't reduce principal by at least $50 per month, the government is supposed to apply a subsidy to ensure at least a $50 principal reduction.
So what I'm hearing there is the interest, if my payment is lower and interest is accruing, that interest is going to be waived. If I'm making payments and it's just barely paying the interest off, I'm not getting any principal contribution, the government in theory is going to step in and at least give me a $50 credit month to month to help that loan balance go down.
Yep, they're going to get you to that minimum $50 credit. Yeah, so if it's only being reduced by $25, then my understanding of this is that the government's going to match $25 to get it to the $50. But at least a $50 principal reduction. So the idea here is, and the reason why they're doing this in my understanding is that it's designed to ensure borrowers see progress even when payments are relatively low. Okay. So again, is the RAP plan absolutely terrible? I would say in my personal opinion, it's not. I think there's a use case for some individuals, right? One scenario where this could be really relevant would be residents or fellows who have new loans after July 1st, 2026. The RAP plan could keep their payments as low as $10 a month, right? While they're in training, making little income before they get into their attending, and then we're figuring something else out. We also don't know what the future landscape of income-driven repayment plans are going to look like. So that's where this gets a little bit speculative in nature also. But my My recommendation is you have to make decisions that are both educated, but also based on the facts of what we know today, because things will change.
Got it. So I guess the question that I'm still just a little bit unsure of, these new plans, the wrap plan and the tiered plans, forgiveness eligible still?
So with the tiered plans, no. With the wrap plan, yes. So time-based forgiveness is still available for borrowers who go into the wrap plan. The big nuance here is that instead of it being 20 or 25 years with some of the older income-driven repayment plans, it becomes a 30-year time-based forgiveness. Okay, so it's just a longer period of time. For public service loan forgiveness, the wrap plan still qualifies as long as the borrower is working for an eligible employer to meet all the requirements of the PSLF program. Now, there are still other income-driven repayment plans that are available, again, for OG borrowers. Some of these will be going away, but for the time being, it's income-based repayment, both the original or old version and the new version, pay-as-you-earn, and income contingent repayment. And then again, July 1st is when wrap becomes available. Now, getting into pay-as-you-earn and income contingent repayment is much more difficult now than it was previously, and it's going to become even more difficult after July 1st of this year. Those two plans specifically are supposed to be sunset and phased out by July 1st, 2028. So if you're able to get into pay now, you'll at least be in it for 2 years, but then you're going to need to make another assessment before July 1st, 2028.
So what I'm hearing is if I'm a borrower who's had loans that have existed before July 1st of this year, 2026, I've got a much larger menu of options to choose from. Now, that menu comes with caveats in that I may have to actually change my order again at some point in the future, depending on how changes continue to adjust. But if I am an older borrower, I have a much larger menu to choose from. If I'm a newer borrower, my menu's been more limited. But irregardless, from a planning standpoint, it's really about assessing from a cash flow standpoint which one of these payment plans is best for me now, and from a cash flow standpoint, which one of these payment plans puts me in the best position later to either eliminate this debt or forgive this debt. Do I have all that right?
I think the principles remain the same, but yeah, you're spot on, right? Because at the end of the day, when we sit down with someone and we diagnose the situation, it really comes down to, are we paying them back in full? Are we seeking some sort of forgiveness? And then if we are seeking forgiveness, is it time-based or is it through, public service loan forgiveness? Well, if that's the case, then we start to go down into, well, how do we take this further? How do we make it most optimized, most efficient to where we pay the least amount required, accumulate, recapture the most we can onto our balance sheet, and not pay more than we absolutely have to, versus if we would have just paid it back in full over some period of time.
So, Michael, what we know so far, SAVE's going away, so it's going to require action and change. What we've talked about up to this point is there's effectively going to be two paths. If I'm an older borrower, I can walk down one particular path where my menu of options is going to be much broader with some potential future changes. If I'm a newer borrower, I can walk down a more limited path from a repayment standpoint, and those repayments, at least for now, are things that are recent changes. So if we continue to go down the newer borrower path, right, beyond SAVE changing and repayment plans changing, I also understand there's quite a bit of changes occurring to how much new borrowers can take out and who qualifies for some of those limits. So let's jump into that.
Yeah, so this is an area of the reform that I think is getting the most scrutiny and where there's been the most uproar for a couple of reasons. One, traditionally, over the course of the last 2 to 4 decades, going and getting a graduate degree, there was less limitations from a federal student loan perspective for borrowers to get the funding that they needed, right? And I would say this is where a lot of borrowers were getting themselves in trouble, going to medical school and needing 4 years worth of graduate loans plus graduate plus loans to be able to cover the cost of their lifestyle needs in those 4 years of obtaining this degree.
Which from an economic sense is probably what leads to such inflation numbers when it comes to actually getting a degree, right? Funding is unlimited, so institutions can naturally charge more.
Exactly. Yep. From a supply-demand standpoint. And again, that's where the most scrutiny comes from, right? And so you have medical professionals, attorneys, physical therapists, whoever it might be, who are getting these graduate or professional degrees who are coming out with $185,000, $250,000, $300,000, $400,000, and in some cases $600,000 in federal student loans, right? Because some programs are more expensive than others. And so what the current landscape looks like after July 1st of 2026 is that there are now lifetime caps depending on the type of post-undergraduate degree that you're going to get. It used to just be a graduate degree, whether it's an MBA or whether it's medical school, it was all lumped into one. Now they've added what's called a professional degree. Okay, so bear with me here. So beginning on or after July 1st, 2026, graduate student loans are going to be capped annually at $20,500 with an aggregate cap of $100,000. So when I think of a graduate student loan program, it's going to be an MBA or a new added profession that got put into this category, which has created a big uproar, are physician assistants. Okay, now most physician assistance programs are likely not, I haven't done extensive research, but I have a couple clients that are, and we've discussed this openly, cost more than $100,000. So what does this mean? This means that one, they're not going to have enough federal funding, which federal loans are typically more advantageous than personal loans, but it's going to push borrowers either to not go get this degree altogether, or they're going to have to supplement with private loans, which again could require cosigners or just have worse terms than what the federal options would be able to provide. And then forgiveness isn't a viable option on those private loans.
Sure. So yeah, what I'm hearing there, physician assistance is a fantastic example of, I've got a federal cap of $100,000 for all 4 years. Once that cap is hit, I'm out of funding, at least from a federal perspective. So I've got to fund that degree with my cash flow, my resources, family members' resources, or perhaps just go out and take a private loan of some kind.
Correct. Now, on the other side, this professional student loan category, these are going to be capped annually at $50,000 with an aggregate cap of $200,000. So again, this is where we get into the traditional physicians, dentists, attorneys, right? Individuals who fit that mold traditionally. So is it going to impact that group of occupations? Yes, to an extent, but I would say that it's going to be less severe than, say, the physician assistants, right? Because they're getting an extra $100,000 in funding to go towards that program. Now, my opinion of the matter is that this could do one of a couple things. The two primary things that I think of is that with these lifetime caps on new borrowers, it's either going to put pressure on these program providers to reduce the cost of the program or get more creative with endowments on how they fill the gap, or they're just going to continue to keep their prices as is, and these borrowers or these young professionals who are wanting to get into these occupations are going to have to supplement, like you mentioned, with cash flow, with private loans, or they just may choose not to go down that occupational path altogether, which could impact the number of viable and competent professionals in the field.
Yeah, so let's break that out, right? The at least thought that I have is, all right, I'm capped at $200,000 as a potential doctor. From a federal perspective, I'll just go take a private loan. But what's the disadvantage of that, right? Before someone just jumps right to that option as next step.
Yeah, so the big disadvantages with private loans compared to federal loans, we've talked about this in student loan episodes in the past over the course of the last 2 years, is that with private loans, there's typically not a clause in the promissory note agreement that if the borrower were to become disabled or die, the loan balance that's still owed is discharged. Okay, it could, in most cases, fall into the lap of a cosigner, whether it's a relative or a loved one. Because think about it. These are individuals who don't have potentially strong credit history. They are needing the cosigner in the event that they become delinquent on their payments, and they don't have a strong income source yet because they're in training. They're getting educated so that they can then go out and practice their occupation and generate an income. Additionally, private loans do not have as many different repayment options. Yes, when you're in school, full-time student, maybe even a resident in training, they may offer some reduced payment strategies. Doesn't help with the interest that's accruing, right? It's only building the outstanding balance along the way. But there are no forgiveness options. You can't do public service loan forgiveness or time-based forgiveness. It has to be paid back in full. So there's just a lot less benefits, and unless private lenders are going to try to match what the education department offers federally, which I don't foresee that happening, then it's just less advantageous all the way. So when it comes to a repayment strategy standpoint, my opinion of the matter is that typically with the federal loans, we're going to slow play those. With the private loans, we're going to accelerate paying those off as quickly as possible, just because they hold the greater risk. Even if the interest rate's slightly lower than the federal loans, a new administration could come in and say, hey, anyone who's got federal loans as of a certain date, doesn't matter what your income or net worth is, wiped clean, tax-free. You're not going to get that with private loans.
Sure. Yeah, there's no relief. And that's relief from a strategy perspective or relief from a future forgiveness opportunity perspective. So It's a proceed with caution type of adjustment of, hey, these caps are certainly going to come into effect. And before just jumping straight into a huge private loan situation, it's something worth really examining. What is the value of the education? What is my potential earnings afterwards? How am I actually going to plan to pay these loans back? How am I going to balance that with the future wealth building that I'm doing? It's all of those things considered.
Absolutely. Now, the last thing I'll add is that all borrowers who receive a loan made on or after July 1st, 2026 are going to be subject to an aggregate lifetime loan limit of $257,500. Now, I'm somewhat excited for that. Right, one of my favorite books is The Psychology of Money, and I believe it's that book where Morgan Housel talks about how, you go back to like the 1940s, there were a lot less people who were going and getting a higher education, right? So having a higher education, having a degree actually meant something. There was a ton of value to it. In today's society, it is almost, in my opinion, a rite of passage. It's almost expected to go get a higher education, but the diploma that you're getting may not hold the same weight as it did value-wise in the 1940s, just because there's so much concentration of young professionals going and getting a degree for the sake of having a degree. So I think the lifetime limit cap helps. This could also create greater emphasis on some young professionals going into trades versus going the traditional route of getting a professional degree. I don't think that there's anything wrong with going the trade route. We know a ton of blue-collar professionals who have built businesses, who have bought businesses, whether it's plumbing, electrician, whether it's HVAC, and they make bukus of money. It's just a lot different work, right? It's more physically bearing and demanding. But a lot of them aren't coming out with the same level of student loan debt as the physician or the dentist or the attorney or the chiropractor. So there are trade-offs. I think it opens up conversations more, and those conversations from a financial literacy standpoint need to start happening earlier in the households, middle school, high school, counselors. There just needs to be more focus on saying, hey, you don't have to go down this path if this isn't what makes sense for you personally.
Yeah, it just puts the economics in the spotlight of the degree that I'm pursuing. What is the outcome beyond just simply getting the degree and taking out a big loan to do it?
Correct.
I guess other question I have, right? Safe's going away, repayment plans are changing, caps are occurring. The real question that we really haven't talked through, if I'm working in the public sector now or plan to work in the public sector, is that still a viable forgiveness opportunity for me, or is that really changing?
Yeah, so public service loan forgiveness, to what I've researched and confirmed up to this point, and even what it speaks about in the article that we're referencing in today's episode, is still a viable option. Now, I think there are some speculative concerns around what the new head of the education department is doing with the current administration as far as putting pressure on some of the, local governments, local agencies, state-run programs, or even not-for-profit hospital systems or programs. I think personally, with some of the speculation or statements in the article, that it's somewhat speculative or even propaganda-driven, so I'm not going to go down that path. But in whole, the program is still there. Public service loan forgiveness is a thing. As long as you work for a qualifying and eligible employer in a full-time capacity based on the rules of the plan, and you're making an active payment on time while enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan or the old 10-year standard repayment plan, and you've accumulated 120 qualifying payments while meeting all those other criteria, you're still eligible for public service loan forgiveness, which is a tax-free event. It's a phenomenal program for borrowers who are eligible, and it could be the jump-off point for when you get out of training to start in the public service sector first, knowing that your income earning potential might be lower, but the trade-off is that once your loans are off your balance sheet, you have a weight lifted off your shoulders in essence, and then now you can transition into private practice if you want to. And again, you have a multiple of income effect that can occur.
So the long and the short there is potential changes as always, right? Laws and legislation can always change. But if I'm seeking public student loan forgiveness, that's still quite the viable path for me as long as I qualify.
Correct.
Okay, got it. All right, so as we begin to summarize and wrap up the episodes with all of the sweeping changes that are occurring, if you in your mind had, say, a checklist or an order of operations in how to attack or how to address a lot of these changes, whether it's from the DIY perspective or whether it's from a, hey, I've partnered with a professional perspective, what does that order of operations checklist actually look like in building a plan of attack?
Yes, I would say first and foremost, take an audit of your current loans, right? If they're federal loans, you can download what's called a TXT file directly from the studentaid.gov portal. If you share that with the right professional, they have a clean way of being able to break that out and showing you exactly the loans that you have, the types of loans going to be important. Are they direct Stafford loans? Are they family federal education loans? Are they parent plus loans? Are they graduate plus loans, right? That's going to be important because depending on the loan type, it's going to dictate which type of income-driven repayment plans you may be eligible for. Or if you need to conduct a consolidation in keeping the loans federal still, but just taking them from, say, 8 loans down to 2. Now, why is that important? Because any loans that are consolidated after July 1st, 2026 will only be eligible for the new plans, which are the tiered standard repayment or the RAP program. Okay, so if you're going to do a consolidation, you need to do it quick so that you don't fall victim to being isolated just into those 2 plans. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is when are the loans dispersed? Some of the income-driven repayment plans are eligible to you or available to you depending on when the loans were dispersed, whether it's, prior to October of 2010 or after 2014. There's just different intricacies that most novice borrowers aren't going to know about unless they do extensive research. So that would be step 1. Step 2, understand what your current repayment plan is and how it's impacting the longevity of your financial plan. What are some of the milestones and goals that you've created or defined as far as what you want to accomplish over the first 5 years of your career or profession, the first 10 years, the first 15, the first 20, right? Because if you're going public service loan forgiveness, then we know it's at least 120 total qualifying payments. If it's time-based, it could be 20 years or 25 years. So we need to know, 1, what's your repayment plan and what does that look like over the course of a specific timeline and expectations or forecasts around where your income is going to go, whether you're single now, if you're getting married in the future, if you're going to add children. All that impacts what the potential outlay could be from total payments towards the loans and the amount that could be forgiven or saved. Already mentioned this somewhat, but determine the outcome. Are we paying it back in full? Are we seeking public service loan forgiveness, which is tax-free, time-based forgiveness, which was tax-free from 2020 through the end of 2025, but has now reverted back to the original taxation, which is taxable when time-based forgiveness occurs. So, just be aware of that. And then, again, you have to run the numbers because you don't want to assume anything. We don't want to run the risk of saying, hey, the plan works, this is the outcome, but in reality, we didn't do our due diligence, and now you're overpaying or you've picked the less efficient path, which just does not work in your favor, and now milestones or goals that we were striving towards are being delayed or taken off the table altogether. So, waiting until these changes occur is not an option, in my opinion, right? Doing nothing is still considered an action. So let's try to be as proactive as possible. And worst case scenario, if you have questions about your current plan or your current status or your current starting point, don't hesitate to reach out to a certified student loan professional, a financial professional that you work with, or in this case, you can reach out to our team with questions.
Yeah, and I think that's something worth at least mentioning, right? As you walk through this checklist, there's a lot of intricacy here that is challenging for a more novice borrower to fully understand, not only from an execution standpoint, but also from an outcome standpoint, unless they've done extensive research. And so this is where I'll highlight it's really your skill set. It's putting you up here in the spotlight to say, hey, there's a true skill set and a knowledge base that's required to make the most efficient decisions here, and having a certified student loan professional in your corner, yourself as an example, is a huge assist for clients who, I don't have the time for this, I don't have the interest in figuring all of it out, or maybe I do have both of those things, but it's just not something that I want to do.
Exactly.
Or not something I feel confident I actually can do, right? I don't want to make a mistake. So I'd say the long and the short, July 1st, that is day of reckoning, right? Save plans going away, new options are coming for new and old borrowers, caps are happening, and there's a real, I would say, new call to action to basically get back in front of your student loan plan so you can make the best or most efficient decision based on what you're trying to accomplish in your financial journey. So I'd say biggest takeaway from today, that student loan borrowers are entering basically a completely different environment than we've seen over the last several years.
Yep, the rules are changing, but opportunities still exist for borrowers who understand how to navigate them. Whether you're pursuing public service loan forgiveness, time-based forgiveness, or simply trying to eliminate the debt in the most efficient and optimal way, now is the time to revisit your existing strategy.
So if this episode is helpful, insightful, or at least to spark some questions, please subscribe, leave us a review, share it with a friend or colleague, anyone in a program who's going through these types of discussions.
And if you have questions you'd like us to answer on future episodes, please visit our Ask Me Anything page at www.genesiswealthplanning.com/AMA. Until next time, remember, financial confidence isn't built by accident, it's built through intentional decisions.
Are you considering hiring a financial advisor? If so, be sure to listen to episode 1 of Financial Fortitude. In this episode, we discuss the reasons why many people choose to hire a financial advisor and highlight the key qualities you should look for in the financial professional you decide to work with.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not to be construed as tax, legal, or investment advice. Although the information has been gathered from sources believed to be reliable, please note that individual situations can vary. Therefore, the information should be relied upon only when coordinated with individual professional advice. Guest speakers and their firms are not affiliated with or endorsed by Park Avenue Securities, Guardian, or Genesis Wealth Planning LLC, and opinions stated are their own. Guardian, its subsidiaries, agents, and employees do not provide tax, legal, or accounting advice. Consult your tax, legal, or accounting professional regarding your individual situation. All investments and investment strategies contain risk and may lose value. All scenarios and names mentioned herein are purely fictional and have been created solely for educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing situations, persons, or fictional characters is coincidental. The information presented should not be used as the basis for any specific investment advice. Michael Acosta and Brady are registered representatives and financial advisors of Park Avenue Securities, LLC, PAS. Securities products and advisory services offered through Park Avenue Securities, member FINRA, SIPC. Financial representative of the Guardian Life Insurance Company of America, Guardian, New York, New York. Park Avenue Securities is a wholly owned subsidiary of Guardian. Consolidated Planning Group, Inc. and Genesis Wealth Planning, LLC are not affiliates or subsidiaries of Park Avenue Securities or Guardian. Michael Acosta's California Insurance License Number 0M50974 and Brady Hemmerly's California Insurance License Number 4353077.
7237198.38, expiration 6/28.